way you're talking about the AI world and people maybe opting out, that's like on a macro level of the world. But then to connect that to what I'm saying about Neuralink stuff, that's on the micro level, humans not being able to opt out in the future, right? Because it's just like you're going to be left behind. And I hope people have that change of heart, but I don't know. But all that, what you just said seems like a good segue into how I opened the show with Gnosticism. And I'm hoping you could describe that for us and then talk about how Gnosticism ties into what we've been talking about.
Well, first and foremost, Gnosticism is an ancient kind of offshoot of Christianity, in many ways preceded Christianity and adapted itself to it. It's a heresy. It's considered a heresy by most, obviously the Orthodox and Catholics and most Protestants. It's also the subject of a lot of really stupid commentary from certain quarters about Gnosticism is really Marxism, Gnosticism, all that, We'll just set that aside, leave that alone. But Gnosticism itself is, I think, quite interesting for a lot of different reasons. Not least because of its sudden reemergence in 1945 with the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, the Gnostic Gospels in essence. Gnosticism had been known from the heresiologists or the church apologists. So we had forever we've had some idea of who these people were, but with the discovery of their actual documents, you get a much clearer picture of the world as they saw it. Mm-hmm. And that world is by and large, building on the Orthodox Christian understanding. So in Orthodox Christian creation, God creates the world by speaking it into existence. And he does so at different levels, right? Beginning with the stars, the sun, moon, and then moving down to earth and life. And in, Orthodox Christianity, you have the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, the temptation of the serpent, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then, of course, in the New Testament, you have the introduction of Jesus, and now that's the centerpiece of it. That's what makes it all make sense. Mm-hmm. Well, Gnostics basically accept that framework, but they build around it, or they would say they reveal the world behind that. And so, according to the Gnostic point of view, the fall wasn't the fault of Adam and Eve. And the fall really goes back to, in the beginning, according to the Gnostics, you had this light, this fullness, the pleroma. And it begins to emanate, sort of like the Platonic or Neoplatonic ideas of Plotinus. Not entirely, but so it emanates into these aeons, hence dark aeon, right? Emanates into these aeons. And these aeons are male-female pairs. And they're less and less perfect as this emanation proceeds. And at the furthest emanation, you have one of those syzygies, or male-female pairs. You have Sophia, the female side. And without the knowledge or consent of her male partner, Sophia turns into what they call the outer darkness. And in one account, sees the reflection of the light out in the material of the outer darkness and is lured away. And out in the outer darkness, Sophia she produces an infant, a child. And it's described in the Gnostic scriptures as being like an aborted fetus, like an aborted infant. And she brings it to life. She breathes life into it of sorts. But it's this deformed, blind or half-blind entity that she's ashamed of. And this entity, known by a number of different names, we'll just call it the demiurge. It's known as Yaldabaoth, Samael, but this entity, this aborted fetus outside the divine realm, believes, and it's said over and over again in the Gnostic scripture, believes that he is the only God. He believes that he is alone in this vast darkness, and that moving forward, he begins to create a world, not knowing that he is inspired by the divine plan above him and that's imbued in him. And he begins to create this world, and that's the beginning of Genesis.
Right.
And so this idea, again, a lot of this is poetic. It's mythology, self-conscious mythology that's not to be necessarily taken literally, But it's this idea that, not unlike in the later ideas of the Matrix, that this world is imperfect, not because human beings brought sin into the world, but because there was something in the divine hierarchy that allowed for a flaw. And so that the world is inherently flawed. That's the beginnings of what they would call gnosis, or knowledge, the secret knowledge. And there are different approaches within even the Gnostic scriptures and what we know of the Gnostic sects as to what to do about it. But the primary approach is to take that gnosis and to escape this flawed material world into a perfected spiritual world. It's not that dissimilar from a lot of Christian thinking. Like, Christians pulled a lot of this out of Greece, out of the ancient Greeks. This idea of a soul that's spiritual and a body that's flawed, and the soul goes into the heavens. Plato talks about this, right? But the Gnostics have a Christian slant, so that Jesus did come to bring salvation according to their narrative. And the salvation is against this world, right? Paul talks about the powers and principalities of this world, and Jesus oftentimes talks about the temptations of the material, right? Don't bury your treasure on earth, but in heaven. So you have that dualism already there, but the Gnostics just take it to an extreme, and they cast doubt not only on the physical world and the ability of the physical world to satisfy or to save, but they cast doubt on the structure of the church and the authority of the church. And so, like many others who have challenged that authority, they got disappeared. And they reemerge in 1945 with these scriptures. I go into all this in the book, in Dark Aeon. But it's fascinating to me. I myself am not a Gnostic, but I'm quite close to a lot of the modern day Gnosticism. I've spent a lot of time studying it. And that reemergence in 1945, you got the A-bomb blast, boom, right? And out in the desert in America, and then the A-bomb deployed on human populations in Nagasaki, Hiroshima, boom, boom, this dramatic transformation of what it means to be human on Earth. And then just incidentally, you have the creation of the first digital computer, which is intended to model future A-bomb blasts, especially the thermonuclear hydrogen bomb.
Right.
And then in December, you have the discovery of the Gnostic texts in the desert, outside of Cairo, near the village of Nag Hammadi. And suddenly, the central figure of Western civilization, Jesus Christ, now you have this new perspective on what at least some early Christians believed he was and what he was here to do. Then, as if it couldn't get weirder, you have the discovery the very next year, 1946, of the Dead Sea Scrolls outside of the Dead Sea in the Levant.
Yep.
And again, it's different, very different from the Gnostic text, but again, it gives you some insight onto what was going on around Jesus and who he may have been. And then you get the introduction of UFOs around the same time. And Carl Jung had a lot to say about all this. I do as well, not as well as him, but also, but yeah, so the Gnostics, I think, are really important for a lot of reasons. And I think that this current push to to get rid of the heresy of Gnosticism, fine, I respect Orthodox Christians and their desire to do that, but most of them aren't taking the time to really understand what it is they're fighting against. It's just another boogeyman. I think that it's really important to look at, because if you look around the culture of the West, and especially America, a lot of the Gnostic presuppositions are baked into the American project. Maybe not as extreme as somebody like Harold Bloom would say, but if you're going to do away with all of these heresies, you're basically going to have to begin with the foundation of America. And I'm not sure where it goes from there. Not a place I would want to go. So
how do you see it? How do you see it baked into the culture? Like, where do you see it?
Well, so this isn't my observation, but the most extreme argument was made by Harold Bloom, the scholar who spent much of his time on Gnosticism. The idea that America could break free of the traditional constraints of Europe and break free of the dominion of, Orthodox religion, Catholicism in particular, and create something wholly new, and create something that is willful, like the object of the Constitution in a constitutional republic being an act of human will, basically against everything that came before, or at least radically altering everything that came before. Now, his is an extreme example, but it's taken up also by Stephen Heller, the aged bishop of the Ecclesia Gnostica, the one of the most prominent kind of Gnostic revival churches.
Mm-hmm.
He's very pro-American, came from Hungary, where he experienced the horrors of Nazism and communism, and sees America as this great project that is essentially Gnostic, along with Harold Bloom. And you see it all throughout the culture, this notion that all is an illusion. If you can break through that illusion, you take the red pill, so on and so forth, you can arrive at reality. Some people try to associate it with, again, like communism. It doesn't, it kind of, but that's a much flimsier connection. It requires a much more shallow analysis. Transgenderism, even more so.
Right.
But transhumanism, I'll end it on that. Transhumanism does have a Gnostic element to it. At least certain branches of transhumanism. There's no there's no one transhumanism. There's just all these different kinds of transhumanism, these different strains. But at least in some of them is described, say, for instance, by Zoltan Istvan, the one-time Transhumanist Party presidential candidate in 2016. He really kind of lays it bare, talking about the desire of leaving the flesh behind completely and uploading one's soul into this digital realm, right? Very much mirrors the Gnostic ideal of overcoming this flawed universe and entering into something that's perfect.
Right.
But we're close to perfect. But I see it as a direct opposite in the sense that the Gnostics see a subtle realm of the fullness, the pleroma, the aeons, as this kind of crystalline, perfect place that preceded the universe and is still there, the unknown Father beyond the faces of God that we call gods. And so the base reality is this perfection, the spiritual perfection in the heavens. Whereas in the case of this the kind of Gnostic transhumanism, if you want to call it that, it's the direct opposite. It sees mostly, not all, just mostly, it sees the material as the base reality, and life evolving from that, and technology evolving from that. And so then we create a pleroma or a bunch of different pleromas. And it's a big difference to have, ones and zeros bouncing through data centers with humans attached to it, as opposed to having this sort of emanation of the divine that the Gnostics saw. And it is, rather than escaping the material, it's just drilling deeper and deeper into the material.
Right. They're building.
In my own view of this, I mean, I see the creation of all these technologies, and it's always being presented as salvific, right? AI gods that know all, that can tell you the secrets of the universe, or at least the secrets of your own life and mind. These divine connections, this communion of brain chips or less dramatic connections, the perfection of humanity, the healing of humanity through genetic engineering or whatever sort of radical intervention. All of this has its, antecedent in religious dreams of healing and greater knowledge and wisdom and salvation. But it's this bastardized or flawed material form. And so what I see ultimately, if I can have a quick 2-sentence confession, is that working from, it's as if humanity is its own little demiurge. And working from like this innate knowledge of the divine forms, we're creating mirrors of the divine that are extraordinarily flawed. And the atheistic transhumanist, like the demiurge of the Gnostic tales, we believe we're the only ones. We believe there's no God above us. And so we're basically putting the human imprint into the digital and into the technological. But some see it as beautiful. They think that this is the ideal. This is what we should go for. I see it as a monstrosity, but again, one that hopefully we can have fun in the shadow of.
Well, that's what Ray Kurzweil talks about, uploading your consciousness into this, kind of like what you're saying, a fake heaven. And I think it's in your book where you say Gnosticism is an inversion of Christianity, and then this Gnostic transhumanism is an inversion, like you're saying, of Gnosticism, because, well, I guess the one early and biggest difference between the Christians and the Gnostics, if I'm reading correctly or listening correctly, is that they believe that the God that created this world is imperfect. The world is imperfect, but Christianity, perfect God with an imperfect creation after the fall of man. Meanwhile, fast forward to this false heaven, that not false heaven for the Gnostics. They would believe they can ascend to this better place, but then the Gnostic transhumanists are building their little machine heavens, and it can be personalized, and you can upload it, and that is shackled to the material world that they want. And so back to Ray Kurzweil, he's one of the first people I ever heard talk about, being able to upload your consciousness into a computer and live forever, if you even consider that living.